And now here's Dan Wooding with today's guest.
Welcome to today's program, and we are going to have a very exciting ride with a former FBI agent who has been involved in a lot of undercover work. His name is Bob Hamer. First of all, Bob, thank you for being on the program.
Dan, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I first met you recently at a writers' conference in San Diego and suddenly began to uncover your extraordinary undercover life. So let's go back a little bit, Bob, and tell us, how long were you in the FBI?
26 years.
Wow. And so tell us some of the highlights of your rather strange career.
Primarily, I like to say that I concentrated on working undercover. I was case agent on a lot of interesting cases.
Mm-hmm. Now, what does that mean, a case agent?
Well, they were the ones that actually manage a case. I mean,
okay.
you would end up being I guess you could call it like the detective,
mm-hmm.
on a TV crime show or something, but he's the one that's actually responsible for investigating the case, putting together the facts, putting together all the reports that you can take to the prosecutor and hope that you can get a successful prosecution.
Now, I would imagine being undercover would be pretty scary. What was maybe the scariest case that you took on?
Well, it may be hard to actually pinpoint the scariest case. I mean, anytime you go undercover and you're pretending to be someone that you aren't and you're going face to face with bad guys, it can be scary moments. I've had a couple incidents. I had a drug deal where I was posing as a drug dealer, and the two people that I had targeted decided they were going to kill me, and I ended up shooting them. I think another one that was real.
Just go back for that. Tell us a bit more. This sounds very dramatic.
Well, it's sort of like what you see on TV.
Did they discover that you were an undercover agent then?
Oh no. They thought that I had $400,000 to purchase their 20 kilos of cocaine, and in fact, the Bureau didn't have any money to even let me use as show money.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be they tried to kill me to steal the $400,000, and I ended up shooting them before they killed me. It happened in the parking lot of a Denny's restaurant, and we used to say we kind of gave new meaning to the Grand Slam special.
Were they killed in the end, or
no? They both survived.
Yeah. Wow, how incredible! I'm just trying to wonder how you keep you keep in character all that time. I think you've been described a little bit about this guy, the Keeler Sutherland played. Was it in 24 on Fox? Tell us about that character and then the parallels with your life.
Well, the TV show on Fox was called 24, and I think it lasted 8 seasons. It was actually a pretty interesting concept where they took an entire season of TV shows, but covered a 24-hour period. I often joke that maybe I was somewhat like the Jack Bauer character in that I had some exciting times in my career, but I think anyone who's familiar with the federal government realizes we can't get a whole lot done in 24 hours. So the idea that they could stretch out an entire season for a 24-hour period is pretty miraculous in itself. But I mean, I posed as a lot of different characters. I played a contract killer. I played a drug dealer, an international arms dealer.
Wow.
I even posed as a pedophile. I mean, I actually portrayed myself in a lot of different roles, and sometimes those assignments would last a day or two, and others more than 3 years.
So let's say, for instance, you're going to pose in a particular. How do you invent the character? Do you write it down in advance, or do you just let it play out?
I let it play out. I certainly wasn't a nerd in school, but I really enjoyed doing research papers. I mean, I liked believing that I was smarter than the teacher on any particular subject. So when you go undercover, you've got to research your role so that your backstory is believable to you and believable to them. I mean, obviously the key to success in an undercover capacity is, one, knowing who you are and also knowing who your character is and presenting yourself in such a way that you're believable. So I had to do a lot of research in various roles. I was actually an expert in Western art. I knew quite a bit about investments. I posed as a stuntman, as a screenwriter. Like I said, I posed as a pedophile. So I had to assume the mindset of the character that I was portraying so that I could convince the bad guys that I was one of them.
Now, you're a Christian. How did you cope with, in a way, deceiving people and your Christian faith?
Well, I didn't really see that as an issue. I mean, I honestly believe that I was selected by God, or certainly God answered my prayer. I'd spent 4 years on active duty in the Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. I was getting out of the Marine Corps. I was seeking another job. I was seeking an exciting job.
Yeah.
And I had applied to the FBI. I'd also applied to the CIA. It turned out that the CIA passed. The FBI had a 1-year hiring freeze. I was getting out of the Marine Corps. With less than a week to go in the Marine Corps, I prayed one night, and I said, God, I need an answer. I had accepted another job up in Los Angeles. Quite honestly, Dan, my prayer was, God, we tithe. You're going to get more money if I take this job in L.A., but I really wish the FBI or the CIA would call. The very next morning, the FBI called and said, look, we just had somebody drop out of our next class. Are you still interested in the FBI?
Huh.
I believe that it was an answer to prayer, and that for whatever reason, God needed me into the FBI, and I was drawn to the undercover work, and so that's where I excelled.
So you didn't feel there was any conflict of not telling lies on one side, but
no, I think in the Bible there are certainly cases where God used people that were using deceit in order to advance the kingdom.
Yeah,
and
it's interesting you say that, because I remember the story of Corrie ten Boom, and when Corrie, apparently when people would knock on her door during the terrible days of the Second World War and say, Corrie, are you hiding Jews? So she would say no, because really the question was, Corrie, are you hiding Jews that we can murder? So in a way she justified. So in a way, would that be a similar case to the way you thought?
Certainly, I think so. I mean, I have to admit, I had more trouble lying to the good guys than I did the bad guys. I mean, because there were times that in my role, I had to lie to people that really weren't part of any criminal investigation, but in order to maintain my cover, I had to tell a lie, and I had a little more difficulty than that. I never had a problem with lying to the bad guys, and never really saw it as any type of conflict with my faith.
Right. Well, your very first undercover assignment, you were a fence. Now, was it you don't look like a fence, but what was that particular case, and how did you become a fence?
Well, you said I don't look like a fence. I hope, Dan, you don't think I look like a pedophile either. So, yeah, in this particular case, it was my first assignment. Things have changed since then in how they select undercover agents. Mm-hmm. Back then, essentially, it was just, you raised your hand and you got to be the undercover agent.
Oh, boy.
I was seeking that excitement, so I was looking for an opportunity to work undercover.
Yeah.
We were targeting an individual who was really a very accomplished art thief and a residential burglar. I was introduced to him. I have to admit, my very first meeting with him, this was my first undercover meeting. And my knees were shaking. I prayed to God, and I said, God, don't let him see these knees, because if he sees the knees, he's going to know that something's wrong.
Right.
And it was the adrenaline just pulsating through my body. It wasn't fear. I wasn't afraid.
Yeah.
I was just so excited, and my knees were shaking. I had the first meeting. Everything went well. He sort of bought my act. We became criminal associates, and we went on to recover nearly $1 million worth of stolen property, and eventually convicted 3 people for his involvement, their involvement in various crimes. But we recovered some beautiful art that he had stolen from some galleries and from some residents. We got jewelry and silverware and gold and silver. So It was a very successful
would you
case.
actually record a lot of the conversations then?
Yeah, virtually every case I did, every conversation
how would you
was
wear
recorded.
a wire? What would you do?
Right. I would physically wear a wire, or the room in which we were having the meetings would be wired up.
Yeah.
Or maybe I just had a little device in a book or something that I threw on top of the table during the meetings.
Yes, yeah. During my tabloid days, Bob, I did quite a bit of undercover stuff, and one day we found out that there was a hairdresser in London that would disguise criminals who were going on bank robberies. He'd do the wig and everything, so I became a criminal. And I remember I found it very hard to keep a straight face in a way, because here's this guy making me up, and then right at the end of it, I'm going to confront him and bring... Did you actually do the confronting at the end of each one of these cases?
Very, very seldom.
Yeah.
Typically, I was not even present when the arrest went down. Now, there were times when I got arrested along with the bad guys.
Yeah.
But it wasn't... Only on one or two occasions did I actually make the arrest as soon as the case was... as soon as we had all the evidence for the case. But typically you got out of there because in many cases I wasn't armed in an undercover meeting, and if there was a shootout, I didn't want to be unarmed, or I didn't want some other law enforcement official thinking I was one of the bad guys too.
Right. So here you are, you're married. How many kids do you have?
2 children.
So how did that impact then your family life?
Well, it had some impacts that I didn't know about at the time. I told my family what I did. I mean, they knew I was an FBI agent. They knew that I worked undercover. Sometimes it was hard to hide being undercover when you had long hair, you hadn't shaved, and you were pretty greasy looking when you came home.
So you would often come home at night then?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize for many years later, my daughter is 3 years older than my son. Mm-hmm. She was about 6 years old at the time. My son was 3. I would come home from work, from these various undercover assignments, and my son would run and greet me and hug me, and we just had a very close relationship. And my daughter was very standoffish, and I never quite understood why she was so standoffish, and I just kind of attributed it, well, maybe it's her personality, or that's a difference between girls and that's a difference between boys. And we didn't realize until much later that when I came home, there was always one blue chair in our living room that was kind of Daddy's chair. And so I would come home and I would sit down in that chair, and I would notice later on in the evening she'd come and sit on my lap. She knew that I went out and pretended to be a bad guy. She knew that I went undercover.
Yeah.
She was always afraid that someone was going to come into the house wearing a mask that looked like me.
Oh, boy.
And so when I first came home, she waited until I sat down in the blue chair, and then she would walk around the back of the blue chair and look to see if there wasn't sort of this rubber band like you have on Halloween masks to keep the mask on my face. So, it was one of those things where I had an impact on my daughter that I didn't know about because of her fear that maybe I was that the person coming into the house wasn't really me but just looked like me.
So how did she know the dangers? Had she been reading books, these type of books?
Well, I think she just knew from coming home that, from me coming home and maybe overhearing me talking to my wife about, something that I did. Certainly, virtually every case I did when we made the arrest, it garnered some type of publicity, whether it was a newspaper article or something on the TV. So she was aware that her dad was doing something that was, causing people interest, and it was something that the media was picking up.
So your wife knew all about this. Did she ever try and talk you out of it?
No, not at all. No, she. There were never those discussions about, I think you ought to quit the FBI or something like that.
Yeah.
It was important for me to share with them as much as I could. Now, I I wouldn't say, hey, look, I'm having lunch today with Jimmy Bag of Donuts, at the Pizza Emporium. But they knew that I was undercover. I would say, look, I may not be home for a day or two, or I may not be home till really late tonight because I have an undercover meeting. I wouldn't give them the nuts and bolts, but they just knew that I was undercover.
Wow. So did your wife ever, did she ever say, look, don't do this one? You'd probably share with her what you were up to, or did you keep it secret until it was over? Like?
No, she knew generally the type of cases. I worked street gangs in Los Angeles for 5 years, so I worked in South Central Los Angeles, buying drugs from gang members, Crip gang members. So that. She was fearful of that, and she really wasn't comfortable with me doing that.
Yes.
And she knew, because it was a 5-year assignment, she knew that I was working gangs. So that certainly worried her.
Sure.
I infiltrated a group called NAMBLA, which is the North American Man-Boy Love Association. It's a group of men who are sexually attracted to little boys. And she really didn't want to talk about that case at all. I mean, she was so disgusted by that case that was one that we never really talked about. And she worried more about my emotional and spiritual well-being than she did my physical well-being.
Huh. So how did you? Because I'm sure they must have had all sorts of. This is the people from NAMBLA. They must have had all sorts of ways to try and check out people who were joining. So how did you break through all that?
It was interesting. They didn't have as good a vetting process as they thought they did. They really were more interested in whether you appeared to be a true believer and whether you participated in their programs. I had joined the organization really as part of my cover for another investigation we were running, and I sent in my $35, and I started receiving emails from the organization, essentially saying, hey, it's Christmas time, we send Christmas cards to all of our incarcerated members, would you mind sending some cards? So I started sending cards. They asked me to be pen pal with a couple of their incarcerated members, so I started writing to these guys that were in prison. They had a magazine. I wrote a couple articles for their magazine. So because of my interest in the organization, because of my dedication to sending the Christmas cards and corresponding with the incarcerated members and writing for the magazine, they just essentially assumed I was a true believer. It's one organization where you could actually join under an assumed name, and they didn't really care. I mean, many of these men were hiding who they were publicly because they were more fearful of exposure than they were incarceration. So it wasn't like they did ran a Dun & Bradstreet credit check on you. It was just if you appeared to be a loyal follower, then that's how they would eventually invite you in. Now, it took typically before they would invite you to a face-to-face meeting with other members, you had to be in this organization for 3 years. So it wasn't like
short-term thing.
That you just, you join and then next week they're inviting you to their public meetings. So in this case, it took me almost a year and a half before they invited me to the first meeting.
So in the end, what happened to them and what was your role in that?
Well, in the end, we arrested 8 members of the group's inner circle. We got 2 members of their steering committee, which is actually their governing body, and then 6 other members that were part of the very tightly knit inner circle. So it was I was one of them. I mean, I pretended to be. I mean, I was a member of the group. I went to 2 of their national meetings. They actually asked me twice to be on their steering committee, which I turned down those invitations. But wow. Yeah, we took out 8 members.
So you must have felt pretty dirty doing that particular job then.
This was my most difficult assignment, both psychologically and emotionally. I mean, I was a father. I was a grandfather. I had coached Little League baseball. I had taught Sunday school. And to sit there and listen to these men talk about what they had done to children or what they wanted to do to little boys, quite honestly, it was it was all I could do to just walk into the room with a grenade and pull the pin and figure I could end this investigation quickly.
Yeah. So I've seen a picture of you, and we're speaking with Bob Hamer, and a former undercover FBI agent with a rather extraordinary life story. I've seen a picture of you in disguise, but with like a red, white, and blue bandana on. Did you used to wear that, and why the red, white, and blue bandana?
You know, I had a prosecutor one time tell me to knock it off, because I used to try to amp up the enthusiasm, to try to get that adrenaline flowing. I used to see how far I could push the envelope, and I would often give clues in many of my meetings. I mean, I would have bad guys in the car with me, and I had Folsom Prison Blues playing or Jailhouse Rock. I would I had worked a $60 million surface-to-air missile case, and every time the bad guy got into my car, when I turned the ignition on, I had the radio cued to a song by Charlie Daniels called Uneasy Rider, and the first line you hear on every tape is, he's an undercover agent for the FBI. So I loved giving clues just to see how far I could push it. And in this particular case, in the picture you saw, I would often wear this American flag bandana because we were targeting an international criminal syndicate, and I just kind of that was sort of my way of saying, you know, guys, I'm really a patriot, and eventually you're going to get your comeuppance.
So when did you retire, and then how come you became a writer?
I retired from the FBI in 2006, so I spent 26 years in the FBI. When I retired, I guess sort of like Rocky on or Sylvester Stallone in the Rocky movies, I couldn't sing or dance, so I became a writer. You know, he said he couldn't sing or dance, so he became a boxer. So I had a lot of stories that I thought might allow me to sort of get my message out.
Fictional books, were they? Or
well,
no?
I have two fictional books out now. Enemies Among Us is fiction, and Targets Down. My protagonist is a character called Matt Hogan, who, quite frankly, has a lot of Bob Hamer in him. He's just a heck of a lot better looking and has more hair. But hey, it's my book, so I can make him any way I want. But he's an undercover FBI agent who's struggling with his faith. Yeah. And really his tether to the real world is his wife, Caitlin. And so I've incorporated a lot of my undercover cases to make these stories. My first publisher for the fiction books was Colonel Oliver North, who many of your listeners may remember. He always describes my fiction as faction. He said there's a lot of facts in it, and so there really are. I mean, I hope that it's a true to life, that when you get done, you sort of get a very good picture of what undercover work is with the FBI. My first book, The Last Undercover, actually is a nonfiction book, and it chronicles my 3-year infiltration of NAMBLA and then a dozen other cases in which I was the undercover agent. And I'm actually proud to say that I recently optioned that book to Working Title Films, which is a London-based company. Yeah. And they've been very successful with putting out a lot of feature films, and my wife is very hopeful that this will be a major motion picture, because I will be able to buy her a new car.
Somebody's listening to this, and they have contemplated joining the FBI or the CIA. What would be the positives and negatives, you would say, for joining?
Well, I think certainly the positives for me was the excitement, that the knowledge that I was serving a cause greater than myself. I mean, the idea that in some way I was making society better, that I was making it safe for us to essentially live under this blanket of freedom that we've been given, that God has blessed this nation and blessed us, and it's a way for us to pay back by kind of ridding the world and society of those people that are trying to destroy the very fabric of our country.
Yeah.
So that's the positive. I mean, there really is a sense of satisfaction in the work that you do. The negative is that it's a bureaucracy, and you're going to deal with an awful lot of paperwork, and
you're not going to just do 9 to 5 work as well, are you? Really?
No, it can be a 24/7 type job, depending on what your particular assignment is, and it's not something that you can just turn off as soon as you walk out the door.
Well, we've been speaking with undercover agent Bob Hamer. What an amazing life story. Bob, I want to thank you for being on the program. I hope people will buy your books and read them, and we again want to say let's pray for Bob Hamer as he continues this extraordinary career. Bob, thank you so much.
Dan, thank you.